In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make your Webflow website load much faster and optimize everything. Let's get started. Hey friends, this is Kabarza again with another Webflow tutorial. Today, we talk about how you can make your Webflow website load much faster by optimizing every asset you have. So first of all, let's talk about why it's important and how we measure it. Well, obviously, if your website loads really slow, many users, before even getting a chance to look at your website, they just leave. People are not really patient with that, and they just leave if a website takes even a couple seconds to load. So that's why we want to make it also faster. And not just that, Google also like really fast websites. So if your website has really large images, or for any other reason that we will get into in a second, load really slow, Google actually rank you lower because your website loads really slowly. So that's why it's really important. So it's for SEO purposes and also accessibility. So it's accessible to more people who may have a slower internet connection. So for these reasons, and also not letting the users be disappointed and leave really fast, we want to make our website really fast. So you can go to any website and right click, go to inspect, and then from this menu, this bar, you can actually find. So if I go to the last one, it shows this arrow because it's at the end, it shows Lighthouse. If you have a bigger window, it might already show. So it's called Google Lighthouse. You can also access it directly, but on any website, you can just load it this way. It's the easiest. And you can just generate a report for mobile or desktop. You press generate report and it takes a couple seconds. Then you get your report.
2 hours later.
All right, now that we have our scores, we see that everything is green, which is great. And anything above 90 is amazing. And it's actually not typical for websites to score this high. We'll get into why they don't. And this particular website on the main domain, not the Webflow domain, with some extra code, it also doesn't score this high. Pretty close, but not this high. But yeah, anything above 70 should be fine. And if you aim for 90, that's great. So now that you know why it's important and how we measure it, let's talk about how to actually make your website load this fast and get good results like this. But before diving deeper, I want to mention that we have a Notion template for web designers and freelancers. And now with a new added page for Webflow. So there everything that I mentioned, I will list them there as a checklist with the resources and, more to read, and also software that I mentioned, everything there. So you can go to the link in the description, download the template for free, and also get the checklist, the Webflow optimization checklist. Okay, so starting with the first one on top of the list, we have images. Images typically are the reason why your website might load slow if you are not optimizing them. And in this video, I'm not just going to tell you, hey, optimize your images, but I actually want to go deeper and explain how Webflow handles images and what type of images and formats you have to export and what sizes. So let's start with how Webflow actually handles images. What most people don't know is that Webflow has automated responsive images. So that means for every image that you upload to Webflow, with an asterisk there, I'll explain that. Every image that you upload to Webflow actually creates various sizes for various different device sizes. So on mobile, it will load a smaller size, and because of that, you will automatically get better performance. But the original one also has to be optimized. So we'll get into there, but just have this in mind that Webflow has this built in. But this is not for every element. So the way this works, you can use it if you are using an image element, and you'll get the benefits automatically. Webflow does the job in the background, but instead of using this image element, if you add the images from the background property. So you can come here to the background and add an image. This is just a normal CSS property that allows you to add an image to any div block. So if you use this, you won't get any of those responsive image benefits. And this is generally not a good practice either, not a good accessibility practice, because you cannot add any alt text to this background image. So for people who cannot see the image, they won't also get any alt text for it. So I highly recommend you stop using background images. If you really don't need to, just don't use them. You can just add an image, use positioning to position it just like a background image would look like, with making it absolute and changing the Z index and things like that. That will help you both score better and also be more accessible. So now let's talk about dimensions, the image size. In which dimension should you export your images in? So this one is pretty straightforward, especially if you use a tool like Figma and if you have everything in a frame. I highly recommend you using a frame. For example, this one has a 1440p width, and that's a pretty standard one. It's a good choice. So using that, you can just select your image and export at 2x. We talk about the format in a second, but you should always aim for the 2x. JPEG or PNG doesn't matter in this case, just go for the 2x. But how does this work? When you bring an image to Webflow, in the image settings, you have this image is high DPI, and if you select it, it actually shrinks down your image by 2x. I haven't checked it, and we'll get into it in a second why, but that generally is for Retina displays and monitors like 4K monitors or above, and in those the way that browsers show the images might be different. That's why you just go for the 2x to make sure that your images will look sharp and nice on even like very high resolution screens. And to add to that and make sure that you're just exporting in a correct size, not below what you need and not above what it should be, there is an easy way to check that. So if you look at your Webflow project and the container size that you use, you should normally have a maximum size container. What many use is something like 1100 pixels or 1200, depending on your design. So let's say you have 1200 pixels as your maximum. That means that any element inside that container will be at maximum 1200. Nothing more than that is, it won't grow that bigger than that. So if you aim for the 2x, that's 2400. So it's easy to calculate it that way. So you won't, if you have an image that is the full size of that container, not the full width of the entire screen, but the full size of that container, then it shouldn't be more than 2400 because it won't be needed. And it shouldn't be below 1x, which is the 1200. So if it's below that, it will be blurry. And if it's over the 2400, then you're basically wasting those precious pixels and kilobytes. And that example was for a full size image. If you use an image that takes only half of that container, you obviously need half of that amount, and you typically don't need to calculate every image. If you use a right frame in Figma and just export everything at 2x, you should be fine. But what I'm mentioning here is a way for you to check that you are not exporting bigger than what it should be or smaller what it needs to be. Okay, now we can talk about formats finally. SVGs, PNGs, and JPEGs. These are the formats that we are typically working with. And I'll just show you in examples how I would think about exporting assets in any of these formats. So if you have icons or very simple vector graphics, normally things that you can count the colors. For those, you can actually, or you should actually use SVGs. and that should be fine. So you can just go to the frame and select the SVG from the export and drop down, and you see there is no 1x or 2x selectable here because SVGs are scalable vector graphics. There are kind of math going on there. You can scale them indefinitely without losing quality. SVGs are awesome. If you can use SVGs, choose them over other options. But again, these are for simple vector graphics and things like logos, icons, things like that. So the next one is what's the difference between PNGs and JPEGs? There are a bunch of differences between these two formats. Things like which one is has more bitrate, things like that. We don't need that. We don't get into that detail, that amount of detail. But if you want to learn that, I'll mention some videos in the list again that you can go watch and learn more about those formats. But what you need to know is you are going to use PNGs and export in PNGs if you really absolutely need the transparency. So PNGs support transparency. You probably know that already. And if you really need it, you can export images in PNG. If not, I highly recommend using JPEGs. So what I really mean by if you really don't need transparency, don't export in PNGs. Let me show you an example. For example, here, if I export this image, I would actually choose JPEG. So I know it has these elements and it looks like I would need the transparency, but because the background is a solid color, I can actually put all of this in a frame and export it as JPEG. I would probably do the testing, but I'm pretty sure the JPEG will win in terms of size. It will be much less than the PNG. So I would just export this as a image with a white background. Then so we don't need transparency. Except if we decide to animate this, then that's another story. Then we need a transparency. But even then, depending on the image, you could actually have the elements in smaller JPEGs and round the corners using Webflow, using CSS, create the shadows using CSS in Webflow, so you are not using a huge PNG. I know these are like little kilobytes, but all of that adds up, and that's going to affect your website speed. This is just a way of thinking about it. This might work for something like this as well. So for this, you also could actually make it in export it in JPEG. This one too, instead of a background. In the other case, it was white, but in this case, there's a nice color. You can export it in with this background color, and it just looks nice. You don't need transparency. So using that mindset where you can use a JPEG instead of a PNG and make it look like it's transparent, you can actually use the blending mode in Webflow. I don't have a use case on hand right now, but we have those blending modes, and you can have a black background in a JPEG and blend that with the background of whatever div block you have, depending on the use case, and make it look make a JPEG look like PNG, make it look like it's transparent. It could even work with animation and elements being underneath it, again depending on the image, and even that will save you some kilobytes, which is really precious if you add all of them together. Okay, now that we know which format and which size we need for our images, we go ahead and export them. After we export them, we need to still compress them. We need to run them through some compression tools to optimize them further. For images, I personally use Tiny PNG, which is for PNGs and JPEGs. It works like a charm. It is free, and it can reduce your images up to, I don't know, like 70-80%, which is amazing. It works just very simply. You just upload them here, you re-download the compressed images, and then from there you upload them to Webflow. But this is great for small projects, and especially projects that don't have a huge CMS. And with CMS, if you have a CMS, a huge CMS, and if your client is going to do the image upload and create more images there, they probably won't bother going through this and optimize it. For that, there is a very cool tool that I've heard really a lot about it, but I haven't used it personally, but I would give it a try. It connects to your Webflow, to the API of your project, and it will automatically download the CMS images, optimize them, and then replace them, and again publish your page, which is just amazing. It automates everything, but this one is paid. I would say it's worth it. For $100, you have 15,000 credits, which is, I believe, 15,000 images. I would give it a try, but I just haven't had a huge CMS like that to optimize. Anyway, one last tip about images. So Webflow has something called lazy load for images. So that means an image in your Webflow project won't be loaded for the user when they come to the website until they scroll and the image appear in the view. Then the browser starts loading that image, and that is set by default. You don't have to do anything about it. I just want you to be aware of it. It's a great thing, but in case you have to override it, you can do it from the image setting, but you see it's by default lazy loads on scroll. But again, this applies only to inline images. That means any image that is using this image element. Background images won't lazy load, and that can also affect your performance. For example, the page starts loading and you have, let's say, 2 images as background images below the fold, so the user won't see them right away, but those images will still be loaded, and that is going to affect your page load speed. So just be mindful of this, and also one more reason for not use background image property. Okay, the next one is fonts, and this one is not going to take you a lot of time to do. It's pretty simple, and you can do 3 things here, like to put it in simple ways. One is to choose wisely. So you are going to add fonts using Google Fonts, custom fonts, or Adobe fonts. In any case, the most basic thing you can do in order to shave off some kilobytes from your website is to only add font weights and styles that you absolutely need and you are going to use in your Webflow project, because each one of these weights are actually a separate font file. Therefore, it's going to be heavy on your website if you use some that you don't need. You can actually also get away with styling a piece of text as bold just using Webflow, in opposed to add an entire weight to that font. So just something to be mindful of it. Choose wisely, add only the ones that you really need, no extras. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is, especially with Google Fonts or custom fonts, you can download Google Fonts, and instead of letting Webflow to make that API call to Google every time to load the fonts, which I'm not sure about, but I don't know if they make an API call to download all the styles or only the ones that you need. But in any case, you can have more control over this by downloading the font and then re-uploading it. Now, in that process, you can actually go through some steps and make your fonts even lighter by using a software called FontForge. You can download this app on your Mac or on Windows, and even delete some characters from the font that you are not going to use. Don't worry, this is not going to break your font. This is not going to break your website. If somebody decides to load your website in a different language using translation tools, the font won't be loaded, but instead the browser will load a default installed font from that operating system. I know it's not ideal, but it won't break your website. So using this software, you can delete some characters that you don't need to shave some kilobytes off. And also you can export the font in a format called WoW2. So this is the newest version, and it's a great format because it's really light. Sometimes the difference is between having a font file that is 100 kilobyte and then a WoW2 that is, I don't know, something like 10 kilobytes. So it's great, but it's not supported in all browsers because it's the newest one. You can maybe get away by, IE not supporting it. Opera Mini doesn't support it also, and also some of these older versions of other browsers. I'm using this website called caniuse.com, which is pretty cool. You can see what formats you can use, and also, CSS styles that are supported in some browsers and some others not. So you can check here always to see what's supported and what's not. Okay, so the rest of items in the list are pretty simple, and there are not much that I can tell you about, except for having them as a checklist that you can go through and make sure that you are doing, and you're just aware of them. So one of them being JavaScript. Just make sure that you don't have any JavaScript in the head part, in the head tag, in the custom code setting, and also on each page, if you don't really need that piece of JavaScript there, because the way that the browser is loading your website is going from top to bottom. So if there is JavaScript running here, it's going to slow down your website. If you remember, I told you that this website at the beginning of the video is not scoring this good on the main domain, and that is because of a piece of cookie banner JavaScript that I have to add in the head code, and I can't do much about it. So just be mindful of that, and this is also something for you to test. You can delete it, publish, do the lighthouse test. You see, that way you see what is exactly affecting your website. But yeah, normally you should put your JavaScript in the before body tag, so it's in the footer code. That way you are running that code only after all the elements or the HTML elements are loaded. There is not much else I can tell you except going through the lighthouse. If there is something wrong with JavaScript taking too long to run, Google normally show you the error, and you can go through the links and read. This is just something for you to be mindful of, and now you know how to do the troubleshoot if you see an error. Now, a few more things that you can do, which won't take you more than a few clicks. So, and these are pretty simple and will affect your performance a little bit, depending on how much of these extra code that you have that you can delete now. So one is going to the style manager and delete all the CSS classes that you don't need. Removing this will reduce your CSS file size. Another thing is going to your interactions panel and clean up the interactions that you are not using. This will, I believe, remove some JavaScript that you don't need, also reduce the file size. Another thing is pretty simple. In the advanced options under publish, you can minify HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what this does is it makes the code less human readable, which shouldn't be a problem if you are publishing with Webflow. You don't need the human readability of the code, except you really need it, then you can uncheck them. But yeah, checking these and cleaning these extra code will just reduce your file size by a little bit, but overall will make an impact. All right, right before I go, Webflow just published this new update, which allows you to specify, well, actually set a minimum and a maximum size for your images in a given collection list. Also the dimensions, you can set maximum and minimum, width and heights. And this is great because as I mentioned, your customers are probably, or editors probably are not going to go through something like tiny PNG to optimize, but this way you can make sure that everything will will at least look presentable, not less than what it should be, and no more than, no 2 megabyte images. All right, this is it. Please let me know in the comments below if there is anything else you do to make your website load faster. As I mentioned, I'll add everything in a checklist to the Notion doc that we already have, so you can click in the link in the description to download that font. I said font so many times. To download that document for free. And thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you like the video and if you want to see more Webflow related content. Until then, take care. Peace.